Hello, fellow nerds, and welcome to today's episode of the Serial Critic Podcast. My name is Iman, your host, and the Guilty Serial Critic. If you ask my partner, my family, and all my friends, watching, reading, and listening to everything true crime related is a big passion of mine. And in the past few months, I've watched loads of crime related TV series as it sort of became a trend in the past few years, as we all know. So today, we will do something fun. I will share with you my top 10 crime TV series currently on the platforms. And in this ranking, I'm not really including any docuseries or any of the classic franchises like Criminal Minds, Law & Order, CSI, etc. Basically, we're focusing on the crime TV series released on the platforms since 2020, let's say. And being the quantitative researcher that I am, I defined the ranking based on a scoring system of 10 points on 6 criteria. Story, cast, character development, directing, cinematography, and music. Okay, enough intro, and let's get to the fun part. Number 10 is an HBO limited series released in 2020 called The Undoing. You will see that all the titles in this list are limited series, which sort of makes sense because today I think it's the best format to tell a crime story without making it too long that it drags for seasons. But anyway, so The Undoing is a crime limited series with pretty big names actually. You have Hugh Grant, Nicole Kidman, and Edgar Ramirez. It's the story of a successful New York therapist played by Nicole Kidman, whose picture-perfect life basically falls apart after her husband, Hugh Grant, is accused of murder. Overall, The Undoing is efficient for a crime psychological thriller, but it wasn't very memorable to me. It got me through an 8-hour flight from Dubai to Casablanca, nothing more. First of all, the story is sort of predictable. If you read or watched enough crime content, you will sort of guess where the story is going. So the so-called twists are not really twists. The actors are doing the job. I mean, it's Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant, so they have to do the job. But their performances does not really get me attached to any of the characters. I couldn't care less, basically, about them. Lazy writing didn't help the actors either. I knew that it was adapted from a novel from 2014 called You Should Have Known, I think, but not the best adaptation in my opinion. Overall, directing was again efficient with some great ideas, especially on scenes between the two main characters, but the most memorable thing for me was cinematography. The show manages to shoot New York to be at the same time this dream and the nightmare, depending basically on which side of town you're in. So overall, if you have 6 hours to kill for 6 episodes of a thriller, you can give it a shot, but don't expect much. Number 9 of our list is another limited series I finished a couple of weeks ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. It's called Defendant Jacob and it's on Apple TV+. To be honest, I have a weird love-hate relationship with Apple TV content, honestly. While they're great at producing TV series, for some reason I hated all of their original films. But back to our series, Defendant Jacob is another star-filled show with, in the main roles, Chris Evans, who will always be Steve Rogers for me, and Michelle Dockery, who you probably remember from Downton Abbey, and more recently from Anatomy of a Scandal, another British political crime TV series on Netflix. So Defendant Jacob tells the story of a Massachusetts prosecutor and his wife who are faced with the possibility of Jacob, their 14-year-old son, being a murderer when he's accused of murdering his classmates. One of the things that I loved about it is the fact that throughout the series, us as audience, we can't really tell if he's guilty or not. So we're basically discovering things at the same time as the characters, especially the parents. So in episodes, we're like, no, there's no way he did it. And in others, we're like, yeah, of course he did. This show is also more on the procedural side of things. So you have the investigation on the beginning, but you also have a lot of court episodes. But the idea itself that the show is trying to explore is not really new. I mean, in many instances before, in TV and film, there is the idea of how does the family of the accused feel. It was already explored before. Cast-wise, I didn't mind Chris Evans' performance, but I'm biased. It was efficient, nothing more. Some of Michelle Dockery's scenes were sort of moving, but I got completely distracted by her American accent attempts throughout the episodes. The actor playing the kid was pretty good, actually, but the writing didn't really help him. He was supposed to be this mysterious character, but a lot of it was over-explained and sort of cliche, honestly. This is valid for a lot of the characters who are unidimensional, making it difficult for us to get more out of them. This leads me to this show's biggest flaw, in my opinion, and that's when you will hear me say my infamous phrase, "This could have been a movie." You will hear me say that a few times on this podcast, by the way. But hear me out. So the story like this needs urgency and high stakes, meaning fast pace, and it needs to keep us on the edge of our seats. But the choice of telling it in 8 hours instead of 120 minutes made the pace too slow in some episodes and dragged some revelations throughout for useless episodes as well. We will talk later in this ranking about another similar story with similar main character, funnily enough, at the same platform at the same time, but resulting into a much better output because the characters were multi-dimensional. So there are so many layers to them, making it very interesting to know a little bit more about them every episode. Well, to sum up for Defendant Jacob, if you fancy watching Chris Evans on screen again, and if you're curious to know the ending, it could be an entertaining watch. The only reason, honestly, I finished it is because I wanted to know how it ends. Number 8 of this ranking is yet another limited series called Candy. It's going to be one of the 2 TV series based on true crime I have included in this ranking. It's a Hulu production released in 2022, but currently available on Disney+. It basically tells the story of Candy Montgomery, played by Jessica Biel, a normal church-going Texan wife who, in Jan 1980, went to her friend and the wife of the man she was having an affair with, played by Melanie Lynskey. You probably remember her as Charlie's crazy neighbor in 2.5 Men. And she killed her with an axe. Now, because this is a true story, there are no spoilers here. But what always remained the mystery is the motive. Was it self-defense or a premeditated jealousy act? I enjoyed watching it for many reasons. First, the way the story was told, with back and forth from the present where the body was found to flashbacks to the months leading to the murder. The investigation itself is not the purpose of the story, but what led to it is. Another element that I loved was the fact that it's set in the late 70s, early 80s, with everything from costume design to the brown muted color palette, to the music, to the writing, everything making you feel as if you just took a trip to that period. Another thing I wanted to give a special mention to is the cast. Jessica Biel has done some of her best performances in the past few years. She doesn't act much, but her performance in The Sinner, for example, was spot on. Her and Melanie Lynskey perfectly portray the bored suburban housewives. Supporting cast was also efficient, like, for example, Pablo Schreiber playing the husband of the deceased, or, for some reason, Justin Timberlake playing the police officer. Overall, the series is enjoyable while you're watching it, efficient in portraying this gory real story. It's also not as memorable when you're done with it. Moving on to number 7 in our ranking, and it goes to another true crime-based series in this list that I watched pretty recently. It's called Under the Bridge. It's another Hulu production, and it's on Disney+. It tells the story of 14-year-old Canadian Rena Verk, who disappears after going to a party with her classmates. She's found dead later on under a bridge in the small town of Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. It's based on a book by Rebecca Godfrey under the same name, who is played in the series by Riley Keough that you probably saw in the Amazon series Daisy Jones and the Six, if you watched it, who comes back to the small town to initially write a book about the lost teens there, but ends up in the middle of this murder investigation and chooses to write about Rena's life and murder. By coming back to her town, she reunites with Cam, her childhood friend and crush, who is played by Lily Gladstone. She was Oscar nominated actually for her role in The Killers of the Flower Moon with Leonardo DiCaprio. What's interesting about this show is that in addition to the whodunit part and the investigation basically, it has lots of flashbacks that really delves into the psyche of this teenager, Reena, who's struggling with her difference because she's an Indian descent, her parents' religious expectations, and the fact that she wants to fit in with her peers, basically. So she ends up making wrong life choices. But what I liked less is the fact that the show tries to tell the story from so many different points of view, especially from the storyteller's one, that the center of the story, who is Reena, her friends, and her murder, sort of lose their importance. So we end up with many of the key characters not being developed enough. I also skipped through a lot of the episodes in the middle to arrive to the final ones because they were sort of repetitive and too slow for where the story was going. Number 6 of our ranking is actually a draw between two limited series. One of them is Netflix's Eric, which was released very recently, and the other one is Blackbird by Apple TV+. Let's start with Eric. It's the story of Vincent Anderson, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, a mad genius kind of puppeteer in this hit show, some Sesame Street kind of thing, whose son is reported missing, which leads him to this never-ending spiral of alcohol, drugs, mental health issues. And all of the spiral brings us the hallucination of Eric, this huge puppet who was basically the idea of his missing son. The puppet basically starts to haunt Vincent like his son's memory, forcing him to reconcile with his mistakes as a father, as a husband, but basically as a human being. Vincent's journey to find his son is also a sort of a healing journey to heal from his childhood trauma or his messed up relationship with his father, for example. In parallel of Vincent's struggle, there's also this investigation to find the son, as well as another murder investigation. So a few things that I really liked here. First, Benedict and the whole cast, but especially Benedict. His portrayal of the role was disturbing and haunting at the same time. I mean, we don't really need to praise his talents at this point, but this role was on another level. The whole cast was great as well, by the way. The wife and the mother of the missing child, the detective investigating, and the missing child himself. They were all gripping and dark in their interpretations, which added to the dark portrayal of New York of the 80s. This brings me to my second favorite part, which is the fact that the series is set in New York of 85, and I'm all for it. Everything from the color palette to the accuracy in costume and the decor design makes you live in that time. Finally, another thing that I really loved was the story itself and the writing. The deep introspection into issues like generational trauma, mental health, and abuse was sometimes difficult to watch, but I think it was important to portray. Now, what I liked less is that it could have been a movie, honestly, as 6 episodes, in my opinion, were too much for the story and the development that we had. I had to skip through a couple of episodes in the middle as they became too repetitive and too slow. While again, the stakes at this stage of the story needed a faster pace to keep us alert for what's coming. But apart from that, I would still recommend watching it. It's worth it just to watch Benedict Cumberbatch give this outstanding performance. Another limited series that I also ranked in the same position is Blackbird on Apple TV, which was released in 2022. It's a 6-part limited series which tells the story of a drug dealer who gets caught, and as a deal with the prosecutor in exchange for a lighter sentence, he accepts to befriend a serial killer in prison to get information on his murders to avoid him being released on appeal. The story is told both in prison and outside, with the ongoing investigation on these murders as well. However, I would have loved it if they spent more time telling the story inside the prison, because there was, I think, more that could have been explored there. First, the show writer is the same who wrote Mystic River and Shutter Island, so you can imagine how elevated the writing was. Then you have a sort of a 5-star cast, actually. Taron Egerton playing the drug dealer. You have Ray Liotta playing his father. This was basically his last performance before he passed away. And Greg Kinnear playing the detective, and there is this new name that I just discovered in the show, Paul Walter Hauser, who basically plays the serial killer. Unlike Eric, Blackbird sort of knew how to use the limited series format to tell the story because the drug dealer has to take his time befriending this serial killer. So you also feel that in the way the episodes are structured. And you feel that slow closeness between the characters building up and being genuine throughout the episodes. Blackbird also gave me this flashback to another one of my favorite shows ever, Mindhunter. I'm still not over its cancellation, by the way. Especially in the scenes that sort of feel like interview with a serial killer kind of thing. Overall, I'd definitely recommend watching it if you liked Mindhunter. We finally arrive at the top 4, and that's where we move to premium television. Honestly, the ranking of these last 4 series is interchangeable. But overall, these are my top 4 crime series currently on the platforms. On the 4th position, there is Mare of Easttown, yet another HBO series that was launched in 2021 with no other than Kate Winslet. It's the story of Mare, a small-town, very unglamorous police officer who is struggling with family, friends, love life, and grief, and who at the same time is investigating the murder of young women in her town. This is a classic whodunit, with in the background this damaged cop. It has all the twists, the cliffhangers, and the darkness needed in this kind of crime drama. And it's not just Mare who is damaged. Almost every character in the crowded cast is tragic to some degree. From the cancer patient's mother of the missing girl, to the priest with a dark secret, to Mare's best friend with the less than perfect marriage, everyone is basically suffering in some sort of way. Visually, the show is also dark and cold, but also beautiful in the same time. It will keep you on the edge of your seat throughout the episodes, as the story is slowly building up with the great development of the key characters. For some more suspense, and because there is a lot to say, I will leave my 3 favorite crime series for part 2 next episode. Meanwhile, let me know which ones you watched on Instagram. I will speak to you in a couple of weeks with a new episode of The Serial Critic, and to know which one I love the most. See you then.